All right, welcome to this week's episode of our show, True Data Ops Podcast. I'm your host, Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior. Each week, we bring you a podcast covering all things data ops and the people that are making data ops what it is today. My guest today is a recognized data and analytics leader, Snowflake data superhero, and chief mom officer, my friend Veronika Durgin, who's also currently the VP of data at Saks. Welcome to the show, Veronika.
Hey, Ken. So happy to hang out with you every single time. Love it.
Yeah, we got to stop meeting like this.
I know. Maybe next time in real life.
Yeah. It's been a couple of years,
Yeah,
since we've actually been in the same place at the same
at the same
time.
time. Yeah.
Okay, so for our listeners who aren't familiar with your background, and I know it's very extensive, could you give them a little bit about you and what you've been doing in the data management space here for the last few years?
Yeah, absolutely. So I've spent my entire career in data, actually. I fell into data as once I graduated from college. I actually have a bachelor's degree in biology. I was pre-med in college. I guess, the whole doctor thing didn't work out. Kind of fell into my first role as a junior DBA. I started as a database administrator, loved it, absolutely loved working with data. Like I got it, it clicked. Went to back to college to got master's degree in software engineering. At the time, there was no formal degrees in data, so here we go. This is kind of like where my whole, software development lifecycle, project management, kind of like my first exposure to how software works happened. Yeah, and spent my entire career, 20 plus years being, a DBA focused on performance tuning optimization, data architect. I led teams. I was a very senior individual contributor. So I kind of like my path into leadership was from a technical background, which is, you get different leaders, right? Some come from kind of like management and some come from engineering. So I still consider myself an engineer. That's why I kind of laughed, like titles don't matter to me. What people do matters. So yeah.
Good. Yeah, I know you've been through a number of moves, even since you and I met a number of years ago. It's been very exciting to see your progression. And yeah, I'm definitely a fan of engineers and technical people working their way up the management chain, because a lot of times, yeah, especially with what we do in data. Uh, People with a management background don't necessarily get it, right? And it's great to have somebody in a leadership position that's been there, done it, knows the ups and downs and pros and cons. Uh, so along those lines, wanted to ask you, what are you seeing out there today? What do you think's hot in our space in the data area, and what's hot, and is it just hype? Where do you think we're kind of going now?
Oh my, how many, like we only have 30 minutes to talk, or 25 actually. So it's kind of interesting. Everything old is back in vogue again, right? Everything old is new. We're talking about again data modeling. We're talking about how do we optimize something, how do we get the most out of whatever systems we have. I think honestly at the end of the day, and also I guess the most important thing, actually delivering value fast.
Hmm.
So the thing is, like, data moves so fast, and people often ask me like, oh, where do you see yourself in 5 years? I'm like, I haven't seen myself here 5 years ago. As a matter of fact, I
Yeah.
could have never possibly even like imagined where we would be. So there's a lot of data being generated every second of every day. How do we, take extract value from it? So now we're back into like focusing on delivering value fast, because if we're like, oh, we'll take a look at it 6 months from now, it's not important, it's not relevant anymore. So a lot of interesting things. I think kind of like because I grew up being a DBA, we always focused on getting the most out of the small systems that we had. I think we're back to that. Even though cloud seems unlimited, it's really not. We have a lot of data to crank through. How do we get the most value out of it?
Yeah. So the even though the platforms we're working on are at a scale that, yeah, you and I never would have imagined when we started down this path, but the data is now at a similar scale. So even though the systems are bigger, the data is bigger. So that question still remains: is how do you get the most
Yeah.
value out of what you have for resources, given the extent and the growth of the data that we've got out there? So since you have an engineering background, I want to get what's your perspective on data ops. Where does that really fit now in this modern data space with all this data and it coming in faster than anybody could ever imagine, right?
So I've been lucky to work with 4 software companies in the past, and I've seen how efficient the whole like code deployments are, the standard, testing, all of that was automated. It wasn't like that back, say, 10 years ago in data. We literally just put everything in production and we kept our fingers crossed that it didn't break anything. The other interesting kind of like, I guess I'll start with differences. For us, so in data, we can deploy code, but it doesn't actually help us test data. So
Right.
that's such a mind twister. I'm like, dev data means nothing. I can't, I can test my code that it's like whatever, syntactically fine. So we actually need an environment where we can deploy something and test it on production data to validate that the data is correct. So to me, that's where like data ops sit. It's not DevOps, it's not your traditional software development lifecycle, but it takes kind of like the best out of both worlds. And automation, patterns, standard. Once we have that and like automated testing, like all of that makes us move faster. We can deliver in small increments. The other thing that I always actually tell my team, when you deploy something that's very small, the blast radius of it breaking something very big is unlikely. So I'm like, don't worry, deploy it, test it. If it doesn't look right, we'll fix it, we'll iterate on it. It's not scary. When we wait for a month, 2 months, 3 months to deploy something, now it's concerning, right? Like it's a massive change. What if it breaks something? Then we have to worry about backup plans and all that. So data ops is like such a natural progression in my mind. Like I feel like once any data team reaches certain level of maturity, they should absolutely kind of like start rolling with it, and because it'll make them more efficient.
Yeah. So it's you know data ops isn't just DevOps for data, basically, right? It may be based on DevOps principles to a certain extent, certain parts of it. And like you said, your experience seeing it happen in software. And it's like, okay, yeah, we're rolling out new versions of software all the time. Yeah. How do we do that with data? And that it is, would you say a mind twist? I think you said.
Yeah, because it is. I personal experience. I've had conversation with software engineer who's like, "Well, here's your dev test QA, go with it." I'm like, "But it doesn't actually work for me uh, because I need to test data. It's not
Right. And
just code that I need to test."
yeah, and I know, yeah, you're a Snowflake data superhero is one of your many titles, and I think that was one of the zero copy clone feature
Oh,
in Snowflake in particular. Yeah, exactly. It's the thing that really solved that particular problem for we used to call it data warehousing. I don't know what we call it now. It's data. We're just doing a lot of data. Is like, yeah, how do you properly test the data if you don't have access to it? And I know you had the same issues I did. It's like they would never give you enough storage space to have a copy of production data. And even if they did, it might take weeks or months to get that copy. And then Snowflake comes along with zero copy clone. And it's write one command, push a button, and zero 0.5 seconds later, you've now
you,
got
yep.
a complete access to an isolated read-only copy of your data, and it didn't cost you anything. That was the other thing that I know that was a hard thing for me to get my head wrapped around. I don't know how it worked for you.
It was. I think it's. I mean, I love it. I think zero copy clone is one of the greatest, probably also most underutilized features of Snowflake. And it's like I think some people just don't get it and don't appreciate the value. Um, Before I forget, massive hello from all the Snowflake data superheroes to you.
Oh,
Shout out. I was sharing with them that I'm gonna hang out with you today, and they said hello. Um, the other thing, to push it a step further, there's another concept I'm very intrigued about: blue-green deployments. When you run your stage and prod in parallel, you validate and then you swap. So you don't have to actually redeploy, because you can swap in Snowflake in a matter of seconds.
oh, that's right.
So I'm like, I think it requires a certain level of like sophistication, maturity of like the whole data ops, like tooling and patterns and processes. But then you deploy in stage, production's running in parallel. Once you validate everything's great, then you just swap.
Okay, so when you say stage, you're talking about really QA, right?
Yeah, stage
Yeah,
QA, you
yeah.
you
So
zero
you've
copy
tested
clone.
everything,
Yeah,
and it's a full deployment. It's got a full
yeah.
copy of the
So
data.
instead of like
Ah,
repopulating everything, redeploying everything, you actually just swap. And it's like
ooh,
you now to like what, zero downtime deployments basically. It's like
yeah.
takes what, a few seconds, if that.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's yeah, yeah. I hadn't thought of that myself. Honestly, that's a
So there you
thought
go.
about how to in the data ops platform. It's got the code repository and everything's under Git and all this control, and you get the CI/CD sorts of things. And you just
Hmm.
push a button. Once it's approved, it just goes and it redeploys everything. But yeah, if you were
So,
running your QA basically with all the code and it's pointing, I'll say, at least at the same source data as
hmm.
production is, then it would
Yep,
actually stay in sync
yep,
automatically. Then yeah, you wouldn't have to do any catch up. You would just swap it
yep,
and keep going.
yep.
Ah, you just renamed it. I guess the trick there is whether or not all the connections to it um, maintain, right? Is all the
Yeah.
tools and
So
all
it's
the
tricky.
production reports and all that.
It's
Yeah.
not trivial by any means, but it's just like, it's kind of like that next step, right? Like we got, our CI/CD going, we got our data ops figured out, we're taking advantage of zero copy clones. Okay, how do we now make it even better? And making it even better is like, doing blue-green deployment. So always like,
Ah,
it's a
interesting. Yeah.
fascinating topic. I haven't quite figured out how to make it work in production yet, but
Well,
this is my North Star.
you and the data superheroes put your heads together and figure that
Yeah.
out and write it up for us because
Yeah.
that's really interesting because then um, that's even more reason to do full blown dev and QA environments using things like zero copy clone
Hmm.
and Snowflake. If you're going to go, well, yeah, and then we're just going to swap it when we're done and basically go live instantaneously,
Yep.
as it were, which is of course what everybody wants. Like I said, it's all about delivering value and how fast can we deliver that value.
Yep.
And I think that's where one of the things I like about the concepts within true data ops. There's the what we've been talking about is one of the pillars called environment management,
Hmm.
but also what you mentioned about keeping things small, componentized. It's not nearly as scary or as risky to deploy something that's small that you've done in a couple of days, especially if you throw in then the pillar of automated regression testing.
Right.
You put all that together and our overall risk profile is much lower
Right.
and our ability to deliver value is faster, right?
And feedback loop, right? Like that's a big deal too.
Yeah,
The sooner you
monitoring.
deliver
Yeah.
something, the sooner, like, you monitor, you do basic testing, that's great. But the sooner you actually enable your business users start looking at whatever you deliver, the quicker they can give you feedback. Because it's like, as engineers, right? Like, sure, we do our best. There's automated testing, it's amazing, but ultimately, person who's familiar the most with the data needs to look at that data, because there's some, like, I will never claim that I know everything about every business I work for. I work for various different industries, and I will never know everything enough, nor I mean, like, it's not my kind of like area of expertise. So I want, for our business users, I want to rely on them as much as possible as well, to give us that feedback so we can iterate quicker.
Yeah, yeah. Now, You talked about the sophistication of an organization, perhaps, in trying to take this particular approach. Do you have any tips or observations from your last couple of years here that would help an organization improve their maturity in the data management practice in their company? What kind of things work, and what do you think people need to do?
It's a great question. I think kind of like something that I struggle with daily, honestly, personally as well, is build versus buy. Uh, we love as engineers to build, including me, but to deliver value faster, quicker, and actually ultimately cheaper because total cost of ownership, we should consider looking into buying. It'll keep the team smaller, but also focused on actually truly delivering business value. There's no glamour in building something that's already been built, honestly. But so this is, I think, been kind of like the biggest challenge for me in the past, both as an individual contributor senior engineer because I want to build like everybody else, and also as a lead. How do I ensure that my team focuses on things that are truly valuable to the company, and where do we step in and build versus where do we look outside to buy? Plenty of tools out there these days. Some are more mature than others. I know it's like a never-ending argument of what to use
Yeah.
and when, but yeah.
Well, and there's a couple of things there too. Is one is, do you are you a software company, and do you want to be a software company? Because once you start doing the build,
Yep.
you're now into lifecycle management. Now you're into DevOps, right? On the software side
Mm-hmm.
yourself, and some of the companies you've been at the past were software companies. Saks is not a software company.
We're certainly not a software company. I mean, we are in tech like everybody else. We are a data company, and I think like I've said it before too, and many people said it. I think at this point, every company is a data company.
Right.
Um, but again, our focus is not to build software necessarily, unless we have to. It's something very specific to Saks that'll give us competitive advantage. Then we'll absolutely look into building. Actually, was it Capital One? They built something with Snowflake to optimize, and now they're selling software. So there's
Right. Yes. Yes. Now they're actually selling it. Yes.
yeah, and now they're selling it. So there is a way, like, so it's that it depends situation, right? Like you truly have to focus on what delivers value for your company first, and
Hmm.
then you make a decision whether it's actually building something custom and potentially, utilizing whichever way, or going out and buying something.
Yeah, part of the, I think, calculation of value that folks miss a lot is the total cost of
Yep.
ownership. And when you get into that buy versus build, I know in years past, I've worked with a lot of automation companies over the years, and especially in our favorite space, Data Vault. They that people look at the cost and go, "Oh my gosh, it's how much per developer?" We can certainly build that cheaper, and I have to ask the question: it's like, can you?
Yep.
Really? If your engineers are building something that's already been built by a commercial company, how much does that actually cost your company in time and resources
Mhm.
to build it? And if you're not a software company and you haven't been doing this sort of thing, a lot of times they miss well, who's going to maintain it afterwards,
That
right? And
that
what's
that's
that cost? What's the cost there?
Yeah, that's always there, and we love to focus, like, as we look at the tooling, right? We have every company at this point has more than one software, and we're just focusing on this piece, like, oh, it's expensive, and I'm like, okay, let's look how much it costs us a year. Okay, is it okay? It's one engineer. Can one engineer maintain, make sure it's operational, never go on vacation, and add additional features versus this entire company that's just dedicated fully to this? Like, there's no way. And I've kind of like lived through that build, and then we're like, oh, we're missing this feature we really needed, and the team's like, well, yeah, cool, you're at the bottom of our backlog. It'll just get done, I don't know, in the
Yeah.
next decade. um, so it was like, but I'm like, but this commercial tool out there, it is already like, it's half an engineering cost a year, and it already has everything. So how do I, like, explain to me why we're still building it? I guess was my question at that point.
Yeah, it was funny. Very early on, one of the very first data for breakfasts I did for Snowflake, which was, I don't know, maybe 5 years ago. I think there was like 12 people showed up, and several of them were Snowflake reps, right? And one of the engineers in the audience, when I was explaining, the separation of compute from storage, because this was all new, right? Brand new stuff. And he looks at me, he goes, well, why do I need to buy Snowflake? I can build that myself. And I was just like, okay, go for it. Yeah. And that was when, Snowflake was maybe, a couple hundred people maybe at that point. And, maybe there was 50 engineers at Snowflake, but that was 50 engineers at that point that are building and maintaining and managing Snowflake. And this guy thought, oh, I'm just going to go in and I'm going to use open source, and I'm going to use, some cloud resources and things. And I can totally build what Snowflake has done and manage it myself. And afterwards, when we were done, I asked him, I said, so great, who's going to maintain and manage that for your customer when you retire? And you're like, oh yeah, I hadn't thought of that.
And the other thing, like we, it's kind of like anecdotally, and it's sad that I have to say it, but when there is an outage in AWS, right? Everybody pings AWS, and we just sit back and yell at our AWS reps, right? We're like, oh, is it not up yet? Now imagine it's your team with one person on it. Like, would you not rather like have an entire actually team, and the company, SLA has SLAs, and there's like all these things in place? Like, I'd rather sit and yell at somebody else than be the one being up, 48 hours trying to fix something.
Yeah.
So there's this like additional benefit of buying. Like, as I got older, and I don't know, Kent, if you're feeling that, I'm less of build. Like, if I'm gonna build, I want it to be like super special. I don't want to reinvent the wheel. It doesn't excite me.
Right. And I think that's in part why I like things like True Data Ops and Data Vault that have some principles and architectures and patterns and all of these things that are there that somebody in, this case, the Data Ops guys, and in this case, Data Vault, Dan Lindstedt, and a bunch of others have thought through this, and they've taken the hard knocks over a couple of decades to figure out what's the right way to do it. It's like, don't need to go invent a new data modeling technique, right? Because we're in the cloud, which people used to ask me that all the time when I first started Snowflake. So how do we model data for the cloud? I'm like, what? Why do you think that it's different?
Right.
Because it's in the cloud, therefore the modeling would be different. But you get that. It's like, why would you want to invent something new when these patterns already exist? They're already there.
And like you said, they're proven. So just follow that, but then focus on actually getting more data modeled so that you can unlock the value of that, dark data,
Yes.
right? Like, we have a ton of data.
Dark data.
Don't reinvent the wheel where there's a perfectly round wheel already available, but actually focus on getting more data, understanding all the data a company has. How can you take advantage? How can you move it faster, right? Like, that's a big kind of like issue. Like, from the time the data is generated, wherever it's generated, how do you put it in front of somebody who can actually make decisions based on that data? One of my favorite phrases, one of the senior leadership members mentioned passing, I love it, data in your face. He's like, I want data in my face. And I'm like, yes. So to me, it means a lot. It means this data is understandable, it's readily available and easily accessible. It's not data at your fingertips or you have to look for it. Like, no, he wants it like in his face. So I'm like, challenge accepted. We're gonna go with data in your face.
Data in your face. Okay, that's good. Yeah, because really, until they have access to it and can see the data, it can't deliver the value. Right.
So it's
Right?
sitting
It's
somewhere,
invisible.
like, who knows exactly.
Right. Yeah. So you can have this, this massive data lake with petabytes of data in it, but if nobody can actually get to it or visualize it or do something with it, then what's the value? It's maybe it has a future value, but it doesn't have any present value to the organization or the folks in the organization trying to do their work. So people, processes, and technology. Which do you think is the biggest barrier to success these days? And which one on Converse is the best enabler for success?
Oh, people, process, and technology. I think technology is, at this point, we have so many options, is pretty easy to solve. You can make some wrong choices, but then again, as long as you have money, you can then pay and make right choices. People and processes, I think, is probably the most challenging, because to me, that's around soft skills, right? We have to work well together. We have to build the right team. We have to build the right culture. We have to put the right processes in place. And processes can get you, like, you can get so bureaucratic in your processes, whether it's automated or not, that it'll prevent you from delivering fast, right? So there's like one of the greatest, the other kind of like thing that kind of is in my mind. So data democracy versus following all the legal compliances. How do we secure our data while also give access to everybody? Like, there's that kind of like, and I know some companies lean one way versus the other way. Um, I think it's everything. I'm going to give you that it depends answer. I think depending on the
Yeah.
maturity and size of the company and the data team, for smaller kind of like startup, technology will probably get from like one of the small startups I worked for, I brought in Fivetran, Snowflake. They had what was that, AWS something site, and like they could start reporting on data very fast, right? So technology unlock the value quicker in that case. But as you get more mature, now you have this mess of like business rules are not really documented. So you need to add sophistication. So you need to bring people that are focused on specific areas, wherever your gaps are. And then you have to put process in place, like data ops, right? To make sure it's repeatable, it's standard, it's documented, it's agile, like all of these things. So probably depending on the maturity stage of your company and team.
Yeah. So, do you think it's possible for an organization to really deliver value at scale if they haven't adopted something like Agile and data ops and gotten that, I'll say, mindset, really?
At scale, no, I don't think so. I don't think you can deliver anything at scale if you don't start putting some processing and standardization in place. Or hire like, or you can hire 200 people, I guess. But even still, people will just kind of trip over each other, basically.
Right. Yeah. If you don't have the right processes in
Yeah,
place, yeah, you could have 200 people, but will it be successful? I guess that's the challenge, is right, getting everybody on the same page. Whether it's doing data vault and data vault methodology,
right.
adopting a true data ops approach or a data mesh approach, or whatever it is, or a combination of all of the above. As an organization, you've got to have, I guess, be at least at that level of maturity that you've got a handle on that before you throw a whole bunch of bodies at it.
Exactly. Absolutely,
Yeah.
100%. Even like defining a business concept, right? If you throw 5 people at it, talking to 5 different people, then how many definitions will you come up with? 25? you know? Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So, final question for you, and I might know the answer to this, but I'm not sure. If you weren't doing data, what would you do?
Oh my gosh. I actually absolutely love data. I do it as a hobby. So it's like I have a full-time job, and then when, time is over for that, I do all of these events and speaks. I'll probably still do data in some shape or another. Yeah, I'm kind of boring that way. Uh, yeah, I don't know. What did you think I was gonna say?
I don't know. Build Legos. I was because you talk about
Like
Legos all the time in your
superheroes. No,
examples.
I'll continue putting superheroes demos, Data Vault superheroes with Snowflake. I'll probably spend a little more time to actually, use a tool and automate it a little bit.
Okay. All
Yeah.
right. Yeah. Very good. All right. Well, this has been great, Veronica. As we knew, 30 minutes would be really too short, because you and I can we've talked for hours offline without even doing any of this. So, it's been great having you on today. So thank you for joining us. Um, and thanks to everyone else who's listening in live on the podcast today or listening to the recording. If you enjoy the podcast, be sure to like it and follow us on social media, and tell all your friends so that they don't miss anything. And of course, these are all recorded, so you can point them to this episode after you've listened to it. You can send it off to them and say, hey, you got to hear this. But be sure to join us next time. My guest is going to be Paul Rankin, who is the head of data platforms at Roche Diagnostics. Really looking forward to catching up with Paul and discussing how Roche is using DataOps, Data Vault, and Snowflake to build an enterprise data mesh. Could I have said any more buzzwords in that one sentence, right? This is an episode you're not going to want to miss. Paul's a great guy, and he has an excellent story. So until next time, this is Kent Graziano, the Data Warrior, signing off. Have a great rest of the week, and see you on the show next time. Bye, everybody.